cord here.
How did it go with Charles yesterday?
Ma'am?
How did it go with Charles?
He had a medical appointment he had to go to, so we had to bump it to tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay, so trying to think, guys, I'm gonna put this dead center here. Why don't you other two scoot back here behind them? Okay, and you are being recorded now. So I'm gonna go back over across the hallway. I have faith in these kids considering, I've taught them all for at least 2 years, so they should do well with you. So guys, if y'all want to introduce yourselves, and Ms. Browning, y'all have right at 40 minutes.
40 minutes? All right. Okay. Hello, we are Coach Garner's AP US History class, and we are trying to do a National History Day project, which will be presented at LaGrange College on the Freedom Riders. And we believe that it's a topic that, hasn't it's like it kind of went like unnoticed or kind of undermined compared to everything else in the civil rights movement. And we feel like we should put more light towards it. Like it needs to be more emphasized on how much the freedom rides did for the civil rights movement. So we believe it's perfect to talk about it for our presentation.
Oh, I send a little money each year to Georgia Humanities in support of National History Day. It's one of my favorite things that students can do.
Mhm.
And I can send you this typed out if you want, but the historians call the Freedom Rides a pivotal moment in American history, because it was and I can send you the exact quote, because it was the first time that a nonviolent army really changed things in a short period of time. We were only from May to December, but in that time we took down those white and colored signs that had been up there for 80 years. So, and the second thing that they say makes the Freedom Rides important and a pivotal moment in American history was that we demonstrated that ordinary people could get together and really change things. And we inspired other people, like the women's movement and the environmental movement and the disability rights movement. We inspired other people to say, oh, okay, these are things we don't like, and let's organize and do something about them. So I can send you that quote. It's from a historian of the Freedom Rides, Raymond Arsenault. So that's why we were a big deal. There were 436 of us. We went on 62 separate rides. There were just a few of us would get together, and we would mingle with regular passengers. These weren't charter buses. We would mingle with regular passengers and head into different places in the South. And most of us were young. There were a few older people, but most of us were quite under 22. I was 19. I was one of the youngest. And Charles, whom you will talk to tomorrow, was 3 months younger than I was. So he's probably really the youngest of the whole lot. But that's why the historians say it's worth paying attention to the Freedom Rides.
As being one of the younger people in the Freedom Rides, were you afraid of what would happen in the future? Because no, I think you would have been confident in what would have happened in the future because you guys were working for a change. But was there ever a doubt in your mind that things wouldn't get changed?
One of the things, the first Freedom Ride bus got to Anniston was firebombed, and the people were almost killed.
Yeah.
The second one that Charles was on got to Birmingham, and the Freedom Riders were beaten with metal pipes. And he will tell you he carried a knot on his head several decades from that beating. So we knew that was those were two of the things that could happen. It became a habit, a pattern for us the night before we went on a Freedom Ride to make out our last will and testament, because we fully expected that some of us would not come back. Well, when I didn't know what a will and testament was. So when I asked and I found out it's if you die, who gets your stuff? I looked at my shabby stuff and said, who wants it? And so instead of making my will and testament, I had a date with a Georgia Tech guy, and he took me to a very fine restaurant, and I had a nice dinner. I mean, seriously, I was living in a $30 a month furnished apartment with all utilities furnished. You can imagine what my stuff looked like. Um, and they said, if you don't make a will and testament, your mother gets it. And I said, well, she's been cleaning up after me for a long time. She can do that. But we thought that um, none of us bought round trip tickets. You know, we didn't think we were going to be coming back. So we didn't see the future very far. We saw then, we thought we would get to our destination where we had bought the ticket to, but we didn't see beyond that. Because beyond that, we were not in charge. Beyond that, we were at the mercy of people who didn't want us there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's y'all were prepared to like put your life on the line. As a young person, did that not scare you at all to put all your life on the line for what was right? You know, it was right, but did it like scare you at all what could have happened?
Well, being going on a freedom ride was not our first direct confrontation with segregation. We had been in sit-ins and we had been in demonstrations and picket lines and all kinds of things. And Charles will tell you he had been a major player in the Atlanta sit-ins and had been jailed in Atlanta.
Mhm.
And they finally let him out of jail because he was singing and it upset the jailer. So, uh, and my friend Lenore Tate, who was on the Freedom Ride with me, has her papers with mine at Emory University, and she was designated to cash checks that people had sent in to volunteer to help pay and go down and pay the bail of the people in the Atlanta sit-in movement. So my first sit-in was in Augusta, Georgia, and the leader of that sit-in was stabbed, and and the image of him lying on the sidewalk with his blood puddling around him was a constant reminder this could be bad, this could be dangerous. I didn't want to die, but it just didn't make any sense. The Supreme Court had ruled in 1946 that segregation in transportation was unconstitutional. And the Interstate Commerce Commission had issued 3 different rulings saying take down those signs. And then there was another Supreme Court case in 1960. And the southern states sort of said, you and what army is going to make us? And so the Freedom Riders said, we'll be that army.
Mhm.
But we did expect some of us wouldn't come back.
Yeah, that's a pretty scary thing. So did you have any role models that you looked up to as like, being in the civil rights movement?
Oh, absolutely. One of my role models was on the Freedom Ride with me. Her name was Casey Hayden, and sadly, she just died a few weeks ago. But Casey was, I think, 4 years older than me, but she had all kinds of experience, and she was very sophisticated. So she was one of my role models. And there were others. Ella Baker was kind of a grandmother to many of us young people in the civil rights movement. And she was just so smart, and she thought we were so smart, and she taught us how to find each other and how to figure out what we wanted to do and who's going to do it and that sort of thing. So yes, I have wonderful role models.
Mhm.
So in our research, we've heard of a lot of the sit-ins that they would do in the freedom rides. What would you, as a white woman, do in the sit-ins with the Black people?
Years later, 30 years later, when I was talked into writing about myself, I titled my piece Shiloh Witness. I was born in Shiloh, Georgia. And what I could do as a white woman was be a witness. You know, by my skin color and my presence, I could say, this is not just a Black freedom movement. This is to free all of us. Because, and you can be white and Southern and have a drawl that, you know, you get extra minutes from the telephone company because it takes you so long to say something, and being part of this movement. And Casey Hayden was from Southern Texas, and she similarly was very Southern, very white. And so I never proposed to be a leader. I could do some research about things like which counties in Georgia have a majority Black population, and that might be where we would go to do voter registration. But I didn't decide anything except what I would do. And on the Freedom Ride I was on, they wanted it to be half white and half Black, and they had a spot for one more white person. I said, me, I'll go. I'm white.
So how do I word this?
Now you're doing a documentary, a video.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Well, I don't know if you have time or interest, but while I was in jail, I was the only white woman in jail during that time. And so I wrote to my friend Faye, and I wrote to other people who were in jail, freedom riders who were in jail, and they wrote to me. And those two collections of those papers are at Emory University, and they're pretty stunning. You know, we didn't have stationery, so we wrote on toilet paper and paper towels and whatever we could find. And and since we thought we might die, we weren't being political. We were just, you know, saying what we thought. Uh, in terms of video, that would be pretty powerful if you could get some videos of that.
All right. We'll try to
Videos of
find
the-
that. We can try to find that.
And every time I go and look at them, I cry because we cared so much about each other. You know, the black guys and the white guys and the Black girls and me, we all obviously were trying to protect each other, even when we were in jail and there was nothing we could do.
So I never got the chance to research it, but how many freedom rides did you go on?
One.
Only one?
Well, very few
mean, the
people
top
went
one.
on more than one. But you go on one and you get thrown in jail and you be out of commission for a while.
Hmm.
Wow.
Excuse me, I have a timer going off. I'll be right back.
You're good.
You're okay. Some more questions.
Oh no, you ain't got to stop recording.
Okay, I'm sorry, you might not have heard that, but when I interviewed my sister Joy, she had a canary in a cage, but I didn't hear when we were talking. But when I tried to transcribe those tapes, all I heard was that canary. So when you go to use this, you might hear nothing but my timer beep, beep, beeping in the background.
We didn't hear it, but maybe we'll have.
But when you listen to the recording, it would be the prominent sound.
Okay.
Was
Most people only went on one freedom ride.
Mhm.
Then when they got to the destination or wherever they were stopped, they were thrown in jail. And, you know, kind of out of commission for a while.
So I know you got thrown in jail at some point, but like you said, Charles and a lot of people in his bus got like physically beaten by mobs and clan members.
They really were. And he was not jailed because he got to Birmingham and the police had given the Klan 15 minutes and the police were totally gone. They were nowhere to be seen. And so they had 15 minutes to beat on them. And Charles, he'll tell you, he got up and caught a city bus and went to the black side of town and found somebody to take him to a doctor. So he was actually not, he was jailed before the Freedom Rides in the Atlanta sit-in movement, but he was not jailed as a freedom rider.
Have you ever rode a bus yourself where people have been beaten?
No, I've been on buses where people were treated rudely, but not when they were physically beaten, no.
Was your family supportive of your movement? Like what you were trying to do for civil rights?
Well, I was the first in my family to go to college, and I only got to go to college because the Russians put a little 8-pound ball in orbit around the Earth called Sputnik. And people said, oh, goodness, there must be some smart kids who aren't in college because they don't have any money. So there was suddenly a lot of money for students who were good in math and sciences. And I was one of those. I was very good at math. So my family, especially my mother, had great hopes for me to finish college and do something pretty spectacular. When I was in that first sit-in, I got kicked out of school. And so that ended that. And she was very disappointed about that. But she thought somebody ought to do it. She just so desperately wished that somebody else's daughter would do it. But she always said, honey, somebody had to do it. The rest of my family, years later, when I went down and interviewed my older brother, he said, we just wrote you out of the family. And that's how it felt all those years. My father was totally, he called me some names that I don't even like to remember. And we stopped speaking about it.
So with your actual family kind of pushing you off to the side, did you take up the Freedom Riders that you were with as a sort of family image and join them together to form like what you would call like a family?
Well, not only then, but even down to now. You know, we stay in touch now with the wonders of technology, starting with email, I guess, in the early 90s. We stay in touch with each other. They are my family as far as family. I have a few other good friends who are not biological family, but the Freedom Riders are my family. And an interesting thing, we're all getting up in years. Interesting, in every obituary, when one of us dies, one of the first things we say is we were a Freedom Rider. That's the thing that we really want to be remembered for.
So do you think that the Freedom Riders themselves were like possibly one of the most crucial parts to, traveling throughout the United States and all these other places for, civil rights as a whole?
I do think so. There was another, we all went into the South, into Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Arkansas, Florida. But there was another group of people who were not part of us, there was a corridor between New York and Washington that diplomats traveled. They would fly into New York and then they get on a bus and they couldn't ride where they wanted to on the bus. And then the bus would stop for refreshments and they couldn't go into the white part of so there was a whole nother protest along Route 40 between Washington and New York. And that had international implications because these were diplomats. These were diplomats from a lot of them from the new Indonesian and African countries that were just emerging from colonial overlords. And there was a big contest between the United States and Russia about who would have influence over these new countries. And here they come to the United States and they can't sit on the bus and they can't buy a hamburger. And it was big international brouhaha to get that section of travel reasonable. And it turned out actually the transportation companies were glad because it cost them extra money to have two restrooms and two lunch counters and, you know, signs saying sit here and don't sit there, two sets of restrooms. So it was cheaper for them to do away with segregation in transportation. But they didn't tell us that many years later.
We understand that many of the Black members in the freedom fighters would sing songs while in jail to kind of lift their spirits. Did you participate in that as well?
I had whooping cough when I was a teenager, and it ended my singing career. But yes, and those songs kept our spirits going. They mostly came from the African American spiritual tradition, and then we put new words to them. I I actually officiated at a memorial service last Saturday for a good friend from the movement, and we sang some of those freedom songs. Things like "This Little Light of Mine" and "Oh Freedom" and "Oh Yes, Yes." They didn't kick me out from my lack of being able to sing. I didn't sing out loud, and I didn't try to do solos, but I hummed along.
When CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, was created, was that kind of like y'all's like point where this like it's gonna start getting somewhere? Like, you know, the Freedom Rides were, you know, doing something, like they were definitely shaking the South and stuff, but it was more so, did the creation of the Congress of Racial Equality kind of, you know, send more of a message to it, like more of an emphasis towards it, towards y'all's purpose?
Well, you know, CORE was started in the 1940s in Chicago, and they did sit-ins there, and they did pickets and boycotts of places that segregated. So they had been going a long time, and CORE sponsored came out of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, which had what we call the first Freedom Ride in 1947. After this 1946 Supreme Court ruling, they put people on buses and they went into the upper South. They never got further than North Carolina, testing compliance. And some of those people were beaten terribly and put on chain gangs, which was if you're in prison, you have to work on the highways, cutting grass and things like that. So they had pioneered that in 1947. And then when this 1960 Supreme Court ruling came, they said, oh, let's do it again. Let's go further into the Deep South. So the Freedom Rides were CORE's idea. My Freedom Ride was organized by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. But CORE was the instigator of the Freedom Rides. Yep. And they had some of the bravest Freedom Riders. They had a group in New Orleans that wouldn't take no for an answer, and some of them were beaten terribly in various places.
So during like your freedom rides and stuff, was there ever a time where you felt like there was a moment where you wanted to get out of it at all?
No, I have seldom in my life felt so certain that I was right where I should be, doing exactly what I should be doing. You know, I just had the sense this is absolutely at this point in my life what I should be doing, and the people I should be doing it with. So, you know, I wish I could reclaim that certainty in other times in my life, but at that time, you couldn't have pulled me away with a team of horses.
So you called it a pivot, like you said that historians called it a pivotal moment in like history.
Yeah.
And like what do you think like more of the Freedom Rides like inspired? Like I know you said that it inspired like the women's equality movement and a bunch of other stuff, but like just how influential the Freedom Rides were and contributed to how far US society has come.
Well, the historians say that we inspired lots of grassroots movements. We lifted up the notion that ordinary people can make a difference if you organize and if you go about it. And so I don't know how things had been going before that, but at that point, then more people wanted to vote. You know, the voter rights movement came out of that. And people had a notion that they didn't have to sit back and take whatever was being dished out, that they could organize and try to influence things in a direction they wanted them to go. Things like fair housing came out of that, campaigns for fair housing. The Poor People's Campaign, which was sort of the first grassroots anti-poverty program project. So I'll send you those quotes so that you have them exactly the way the historians say it, which is more sophisticated with footnotes, and I don't speak like that.
So do you have anything you regret not doing? Like anything that you now, after it's all basically over with, do you have anything that you think you could have done more, or you could have done better, or you just could have done in general that you didn't do?
Not on the freedom rides, because you know, I was there to be a white female, a white Southern female, and to follow the leader. And each time we had an action, we'd name a leader. And so our leader was James Foreman. And so whatever he told me to do, that's what I did. That's what I had said I would do. I regret, I really regret that I didn't finish college. But you know, when you get kicked out of college and your scholarships are snatched, that's sort of the end of that. But I couldn't have done the freedom rides if I had stayed in college. So either or, I guess, and I'm glad I got the or.
Hold on, just blank.
All right. So have you ever like met a lot of like the civil rights leaders, and whenever you met them, if you have, did you feel like a sense of y'all are together because of how influential the freedom rides were?
Well, not necessarily because of the freedom rides, but I was in Atlanta, and it was 1960. I came to Atlanta in 1961. It was 1965 before I saw a group out in public that was integrated, and I didn't know every one of them. There were not many of us, and so we generally knew each other. I volunteered with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which had 2 rooms over a beauty parlor on Auburn Avenue. And Julian Bond was there, and people would call in and say they were having a sit-in or something here, and give him the facts, and he'd handwrite it out. I'd type it on stencils and make copies and put in envelopes, and to the New York Times and the Washington Post and all these newspapers. But then we never had any money. Really, we never had any money. So they would send me across the street to Dr. King's organization, and I would go up to his secretary and ask her for stamps, and she would open her drawer and give me as many stamps as we wanted. And Dr. King would sometimes come out to talk to his secretary, and he'd say, "Well, good morning, young lady. How are you today?" I know he never knew my name, but he was very polite and very cordial. You know, and this is 1961. He's not yet a national holiday, but he's already a big deal. Even then he's a big deal. And so I was in his company several times. One of the things I have out at Emory in my papers are notes that I took. I went to hear him speak at Spelman College in October 1961. And I took notes that night, and I don't know why, but I asked him for his autograph and he gave it to me. So I've had up here in West Virginia all these many years an original Martin Luther King Jr. autograph, which is now out at Emory. They'll take better care of it than I have. But I was trained in nonviolence by Reverend James M. Lawson Jr., who was the guru of nonviolent civil disobedience. He brought the technique to Dr. King. They had both been very taken with Mahatma Gandhi, but Dr. King hadn't figured out how to do it on the streets, and Reverend Lawson did, and so he trained me. So I never had to be tested again. I knew I had passed. And Miss Ella Baker, you can never overestimate her importance to the whole movement. So I was in company of really, really smart, really good people.
Mhm.
And they took care of us. There came a time when I needed to see a dentist, and they found a black dentist who would take care of whatever it was that was a problem. And one of my most fond memories of that time is I, uh, at that time I got permanent waves, and I call it my big hair day. And it came time that I needed some attention to my hair, so they arranged for this black hairdresser to take care of it. So when I plopped down in her chair, she looked at me and I looked at her, and she says, "I have no idea what to do with this." She had never seen hair. I mean, my hair is naturally straight as a board. So, well, we figured out something she could do with it. But you know, I was really accepted widely in the Black community, and that was a great joy.
So we've heard of the history teacher you had who believed that the world would be better off if the Confederacy had won. Can you tell us about that history teacher and what his class might have looked like?
In Georgia, the white schools taught Georgia history as if the Confederate had won. It was a perverted history. I never had a history teacher up to the time I was in the freedom movement that taught real history. But the African American colleagues like Julian Bond would teach about various things. His father had been very prominent in Black history, and so just talking about his father, I would say, "Gee, I wish I'd known that. I should know that." I'm sorry, don't tell Mr. Garner, but I never had a decent history. I try to be one, but I didn't have a model. There was a sociologist, a man named Howard Zinn, who did a lot of writing about our movement. And in fact, I'm in 3 or 4 of his books. He was trying to get down the history of what we were doing at the time that we were doing it. And he did a good job of that.
All right, well.
So what exactly did Howard Zinn touch up on whenever he was writing about the freedom rides and all of that stuff?
Well, I'll send you some of these clips too. He published a book called Southern Mystique, and in a chapter about it's the Southern white unfathomable, he writes about several white people that I knew and that they were anti-racist. And then he writes about that night that I went to hear Dr. King, and then says she went to his wife invited me to their home and we talked. And he said we didn't see her again until I went down into Albany and she was in jail as a freedom rider. So he wrote a whole piece about the Albany movement. And he wrote the history of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in its early days. Very, very important work. Still true, still referenced. He said he was a sociologist, but we thought he was a pretty good historian.
Mhm.
And again, to show you how we stayed connected, that was in 1961. In 2005, I ran for election to the West Virginia legislature, and he gave me the largest campaign contribution that I received. So we had stayed in touch all those years, and I almost didn't cash it, but I needed it, so I made a photocopy and cashed it. And in fact, half of my campaign funds came from people from the civil rights movement, from Julian Bond and folks like that.
So is there anything, because we're doing our documentary, is there anything that we should touch up on, like specifically in on the Freedom Rides specifically?
Well, if you go to YouTube and just punch in Freedom Rides, Lenore Tate, who was on the Freedom Ride to Albany with me, she and I went back to Albany many years later, and there's YouTube of the two of us talking about it. But I was on the Albany, Georgia Freedom Ride. That was my gig. There are lots of resources. I actually think I may have images of my papers and Lenora's from that are out at Emory. If I do, I'll send them to you. Save you a trip out there. But there's some of those are just stunning. One of them is on a 6-foot long piece of toilet paper. You talk about word count. You have to really want to add some words to put it on a long piece, and you can imagine what the quality of the toilet paper was. It's lasted 70 years. But I'll see if I can find those images and send them to you, because if you're doing a documentary, visuals are so important.
Yeah.
And pictures of us when we were young and all of that, and gorgeous and have big hair.
Just your credibility for our documentary is going to be very big in our thing, because it's at LaGrange College and it's on, I think, March 10th. It's gonna be.
Yeah, it's coming up soon, I know.
Oh, yeah. So we gotta put this together. So we're hoping with you and Charles Person, we really get, what exactly it was to be a Freedom Rider, how it affected you guys, how, all of this stuff happened, and just the backstories of everything. And it's really big.
Well, in later life, and when I came to West Virginia, I didn't have a college degree, but I had that math skill. So I started a bookkeeping service. And there came a time when I was offered substantial financial reward if I would do something that was not totally illegal, but was against my general ethics. And so I went out one night, laid against the ground up on the mountain, and I said, I can't do that. I'm a freedom rider. Freedom riders don't cut corners. And so that's one way it influenced me the rest of my life. I also knew that what one of us did impacted the reputation of others. We were a group, and we were identified by our commitment to each other and to what was right. And so if I had cut corners, it would reflect badly on other freedom riders. So, can't do that. I'll keep on being poor. I'm used to it. I'm good at that. But it has, and as I said, every time I see an obituary for a freedom rider, that's one of the first things that are mentioned is that we're a freedom rider.
We have to wrap it up.
Okay, well, where I am. If you have follow-up questions,